So last week we had a very important celebration. Many of you were here. It was the celebration of 20 years of Buddha Eye Temple since our official founding in 2004. And it was in the summer of 2004. So we're about 20 years plus, maybe 8 months or so like that. And so we had this celebration last week. And, it gives you kind of a chance to reflect a little bit, and I'd like to talk about that this morning. What is the significance of 20 years? So I think the straightforward thing that we can celebrate about 20 years of practice together is just very direct and tangible. There's a kind of richness that has emerged, trust, care, refuge, which takes time. In a way, it's always there, and I'll talk a little bit about that this morning. But when we invest in something, and we come back to it again and again and again and again and again, through many different phases of our own life, our own spiritual journey, there's something that emerges. And I think that's very palpable here. It is for me at least, and I think it is for many. And even when people come, maybe you've only been here a short time, or maybe even today's your first time to be here. I believe this place is filled with that spirit, and people can tune into that relatively quickly. I love being in a place where pretty much everything is kind of a person. It's when you stay in a place for 20 years isn't that long, but you stay in a place for a while, you start realizing, I've said this before in Dharma talks, it pretty much just point to the thing in this room, and there's this whole rich context which I'm privileged to know about because I've been here for that period of time, and many of you have been here for that period of time. So many of the things we've made with our own hands, or we've been pressed up against something that we needed to do or wanted to do, and we haven't had all of the things that we need to do it. And so we try to figure out how will we pull together the resources to get some folding chairs, for example. 20 years ago, there were no folding chairs. There were not so many cushions, and a lot of sewing and putting together money to buy chairs, etc. So there is this kind of quality in which everything around here has a meaning that's placed in time and space, and that meaning, we could say, is this deep interconnectedness. To be in a world where things are alive is to be alive ourselves. So much of our life in the modern world asks us to relate with things not as being alive, but being simply as objects of our consciousness, objects that will fulfill my plans or needs in some way. And that has a really deadening effect on our own aliveness. So maybe the tariffs aren't all bad. Now, one way we can think about this kind of richness, kind of a trust, a kind of knowing this interrelationship of things, which helps us see them as the alive beings that they are, that we are, we can see how that builds up over time. And that's what I'm referencing here as 20 years. And that's why we celebrate things like that. That's why we have a cake. That's why we make a lot of noise. That's why we make some special project that will mark that period, because it shows us, okay, this is how far we've come. This is the journey, etc. But there's another reason. And that other reason is that we come full circle. In a way, this place is not so different than when we moved here 22 years ago and started fixing it up to have the official opening. In most ways, it's not so different. There's many, many surface changes, But if you're intimate with the fig tree, for example, the fig tree is, very generous, very patient and kind, puts up with our shenanigans, and I think even sometimes turns her favor on us. Of course, every year she's giving us I don't think she's begrudging the fruit, but she puts up with us. So if we get to know a place more deeply, it's not just about how things build up over time, but it's how we are in that place or with those people or those beings or in that community, etc. And that coming full circle, when we come to an important marker of time, one thing is look how far we've come, but the other is look how we're just really in the same place that we've always been. And both are very important. Oftentimes we value the first, it's quantifiable in a way, usually. But the second, although we might feel it deeply, we don't quite know how to rely on it. We don't know how to make that be the thing which is guiding our life. When we had social structures that were more intact, I think that people had this experience through certain social institutions like marriage, for example, that would allow this. It didn't guarantee it. There was always lots of problems, but people would get into an opportunity to realize this thing through anniversary, through the time, which is what have we accomplished, but also what continues to be present and always has been present. So that full circle, to understand about that full circle is to understand about where the richness comes from. The richness doesn't come from an accumulation. It doesn't come from getting more and more and more and more. It comes from some other thing. I think fundamentally that other thing or that other reality is the inseparability or the mutuality of our lives and the context that we live in. We're so quick, it's my life, right? It's so suspicious. What, my life? What is my life? There's life, but Buddhism will tell us it's not mine, right? That's a very fundamental teaching in Buddhism of no self. It doesn't mean there's no experience of a me or that there's no minus quality about my choices, etc. It just means that what I know as life is not something that simply comes through something that I can delineate in my own sense of individuality. That whatever I'm living is coming from all the things which are living me, or all the things which are allowing my life to be, or supporting my life to be. That the world is coming through me would be another way to put it. And so when we come to a full circle, like a 20 years like this, one of the joys is to see, oh, really, whatever has happened here for as long as I have been here, whether that's a few weeks or months or years or the whole time, that my life and the life of this place which I'm celebrating or this event that I'm celebrating, that we've all grown together, that I can't just neatly divide, that mutuality is at the basis of it. I'd say another aspect of that, this is a word I'm very fond of, not a word we use that much these days, is fidelity. Have I stayed true to this relationship? Or maybe we could say, in what ways has this relationship been true? And have I lived truly through this relationship? Anniversaries give us a time to reflect on that. Right? This has a lot to do with why a community becomes trustworthy, or becomes a temple community becomes a place in which refuge is possible, because people are endeavoring to live in a relationship of fidelity, not just with a physical place, but with the community. And that fidelity essentially is not a tight thing. It's not about holding the line, staying on one side of a wall, and all that kind of way of thinking about things. But it is not easy. And so that's another thing that an anniversary brings to us, is an opportunity to say, what kind of work does this really take? Not just the work to build something, to accomplish, but the work that is about staying in right relationship and coming back to that right relationship again and again and again. I have the good fortune of having a very good model of long-term fidelity in my parents, who've been married for 60 plus years. Don't know how my mom does it. Happy Mother's Day, by the way. I know how my dad does it, but anyway, at their 60th anniversary, we threw a party for them, and I always get named as the person that's supposed to say something because I can never stop talking. So my brothers are like, "You have to say something. You have to say something." And so after we had lunch together, and we were having a cake, and their grandkids, their children, their grandkids, their great grandkids are there, and it was just really lovely time. And so I was supposed to say something, and so I had written some notes, and I was just thanking them for the hard work that it is to stay in that relationship of fidelity for so long. And again, I'm not just talking about staying married, but I'm talking about coming back to each other again and again and again and again and again, and letting that build this thing which has been so foundational to my life as their son. And so I was talking about this, and I could tell I was maybe overemphasizing the hard work a little bit. And my wife was starting to look at me. And then my dad, who is a surprising person. If you meet him, he's quite jolly, very talkative, a little rough, not in a... He will want to mess with you. Let's just put it that way. He's of that kind of age and temperament and place where you look a little bit like a slot machine to him. So he's gonna like try to see what might light you up a little bit. Usually that's his. But really a wonderfully kind man. And he said, he kind of, after I made my play, he said, we choose this life because it's the best way to live. Because living this way has made our life so enriched. And he's dad, so he needs to be able to say that. So I really appreciated it. I had missed it. I had missed it a little bit. And he knew how to say it. And I say that, again, not to try to canonize marriage or say that this is always the case with everything. But there is a possibility, and it doesn't just mean that we stay in a particular community or in a particular relationship, which is the expression of the fidelity. The fidelity is something deeper than that. The fidelity is about how do we bring real honesty to the table. That does not get bigger or smaller through time. You can't pile it up. It's more like a gateway than it is like any particular thing. And so when we talk about coming full circle, we're not just talking about what we've accumulated again, but we're talking about this clarification of a kind of way of being, which emerges through this recognition of our inseparability, our mutuality, and then staying true to ourselves and to our relations. And then the third thing I would say, if we want to understand where this richness comes from, or this trust, is just what I've said, the immediacy of it. It can't be piled up. It can't be something which you build up and then you have it. You have to do it for it to be there. So you have to trust for trust to be engendered. Those of you who have had the good fortune of raising children, you know this dynamic really clearly. If you don't trust them, they don't become trustworthy. But just because you trust them doesn't mean they're trustworthy. Right? And it's this very complex thing. If you try to figure it out, it will just drive you mad. Actually, you can't figure it out. You have to trust. And in that trust, you have to be trustworthy, and trust builds through that exercise. But there's no, it's not a built-up thing. So, this full circle that I'm referring to here, it was interesting actually when I wrote the title. Usually I write the title for my talks in the week at some point, not knowing exactly what I'm going to say, but knowing where I'm headed. And this week I wrote that, and I wrote Circle of Time, and then the significance of 20 years anniversary or something like that. And it was very interesting that then the person who was doing the digest, they said something about the Wheel of Time. I said, no, not Wheel of Time. It's not Wheel of Time. Circle. And it got me thinking, why is it wheel? Why does circle get turned to wheel so immediately in our head? Because it's moving, right? And it's cyclical. Hold on to that thought for a second. And then when I read this morning to remind myself what I said I was going to talk about, it said the circle of time. And I was like, no, that's wrong. It's not the circle of time. Right? It's circle of time. So this is kind of my new point. Not the circle of time, but circle of time. And it's not a circle of time either. Right? It's just time, circle, or circle time. Right? That even the of, I think I had written circle of time, but then who was doing the digest put the in front of it because it sounded funny. It seemed like there should be a the there. But when I read it, I was like, no, that's wrong. Even the of is wrong. It should just be circle time, not the circle of time. Okay? So circle time, 20 years. Yeah. You know, they took those merry-go-rounds off the playgrounds. They said they were dangerous. They might not have only been physically dangerous. They might be. Your Abbot's consciousness might have been marked by it. So, circle time. That's what I'm talking about here. These kind of anniversaries, or we recognize a period of time. The circle appears. Or circle appears. Circle appears as that 20 years. Circle appears as a moment. Circle appears as 60 years. Circle appears as 18 years. That circle is neither big nor small, and yet our tendency or our habit is to work with it in the linear way. What has been accomplished or not been accomplished. Today is the 26th birthday of our daughter Satsuki, who passed away when she was 18. Her circle is 18 years. And 26 years. Is a circle. It's circled. That's it. It's never apart. We never need to wait for it. We actually can never wait for it. So 20 years is not about waiting 20 years until you've done everything that needs to be done in the 20 years so that now a place can be rich or full. It's that there's no waiting. If you wait, the 20 years will never come. There'll never be an anniversary of 20 years if you wait 20 years for the anniversary. Right? I'm kind of talking Dr. Seuss here, but it's the logic of this, the way things are. That by putting yourself in with sincerity and wholeheartedness, right from the beginning, that's the anniversary of 20 years. The circle of 20 years is already there. Now, our tendency from a Buddhist diagnosis, or the diagnosis of the Buddha, was that this is difficult for us to live out this way because of self-clinging. That when we cling, another way to think about that is when we try to put ourself in the fulcrum of the lever. Like, what do I want? What do I get? I'm afraid, I want to protect, I want to care for, but I'm in this, I have a lot of karma around this, I'm a lot of tension, and so I cling in this way, which isn't just like, when you hear yourself clinging, we think it's only about holding on to myself, but it's the holding on to myself as the center, which then becomes how I organize my life. How does this relate to me? How does something positive build up, or how does something negative be decreased? Right? Which is good. I prefer for good things to increase and bad things to decrease, don't get me wrong. But when that becomes the center, and that's how I'm trying to organize things, that this is profoundly unstable. And it's unstable in a way that we can never really feel satisfied. We'll always feel off kilter because we're trying to create the balance rather than to simply know the balance. Did you ever get on one of those boards? When I was a kid, it was kind of popular. There's this, it would be like a round piece of wood, and then this kind of biggish skateboard thing that would sit on top of it, and you tried to balance. Yeah, this is before we were cool enough to be good at skateboarding. I was never cool enough to be good at skateboarding. And you will kind of do this thing. Now, if you tried to just like, oh, I'm a little far to the right, I'm going to put a little more weight to the left, you just never could get the balance, right? That's not what balancing is like. It's not like an addition, subtraction, calculated mentality. You actually had to feel for the way that the left and the right are completely present. And if you can allow the presence of the left and the right, there's a balance that can emerge. So what we tend to do is we tend to try to organize things so we get just the right amount of the left side and just the amount of the right side to make some balance appear. But that's never sustainable. It doesn't really last because that little thing in the middle is actually not there. Or another way we could say it is, it won't stay still. It only seems like it's where it is because you're holding on to it, but you can't hold on to it and keep it in its place, so it starts moving around. Otherwise known as your life is crazy, right? Like everyone, even if your life's pretty settled, stuff, you're like, how could this be? You know, something moves over here, and now you don't have the balance anymore. So you have to learn this different way, not to try to create the circumstances of the balance, but to balance in the circumstances that you're in. So that's where a settledness can emerge. Whereas this kind of clinging doesn't really allow for it. Now in traditional Buddhism, this kind of instability is referred to as samsara, which comes, one way it gets translated is cyclic existence. Like the cycle of birth and death, which just sounds like, a lot like the whole circle, right? And it is. But it's the whole circle encountered through self-grasping. When you encounter circle time through self-grasping, it looks like things getting better and things getting worse, and things you love disappearing, and things that you hate appearing. And things you love appearing, and things you hate disappearing. That's there too, but usually it's not quite as good to make the point. Yeah. So that's all happening, but it's circle time. All of that's there. If you think you would get through your life without hardship, sorry, that's not how it goes. Actually, it's better. If you didn't have hardship, you would be in a horrible jail, really. You'd be in a horrible jail of your own self-making. You have no capacity to go beyond it. So your hardship is a kind of invitation. And this is why the ancient sage Nagarjuna, for example, said, many ancestors said this, but Nagarjuna is maybe the earliest and most famous. He said, samsara, cyclic existence, marked by dukkha, or suffering, or unsatisfactoriness, and nirvana, which is the completeness of the circle that is still and luminous, that these are not different things or different places, that they are in fact one. There's no place called samsara that you can get away from to go to nirvana. And Nagarjuna said that the case is because both of them are empty, meaning both of them are not a place. They're not something that you could grasp onto. And because both of them are something that's beyond grasp, they're inseparable. On the big hunk of wood, those of you who were here last week, or those of you who've been around for the past month or so, you may have seen this very big piece of white oak that our brother in the Dharma Kogen brought here 10 years ago when we built the hall. And was sitting over there underneath the heater. And so many of you have probably sat with that piece of oak over the past decade or so. And Kogen led a team that fashioned it into a new han, which is this wooden block that's outside that marks the calling together of an assembly. So this new one's really big. You should, if you haven't seen it yet, be excited. It's quite fantastic. And usually on the front of this han, although the han we've been using for the past 20 years didn't have this written on front of it, but usually there's a gatha that's written on the front, which says something like, birth and death are a great matter. The light and the dark pass by quickly. Each one of you, wake up, wake up. Don't squander this life. She prefers that word. Don't squander this life. And that's written on those hans all over Japan. I'm assuming in China you could read this too, but in Japan, if you're in a Zen temple, not only Soto Zen, that's almost always written on the han. Sometimes it just says birth, death, great matter. Sometimes it will just have 4 characters on it. And it's such an appropriate thing to whack, to call together an assembly. It's circle time, right? Kindergarten. Circle time. It's always circle time. And the Han is saying that. It's circle time. This matter of birth and death, which we take and we split apart from each other for the purposes of trying to protect our own hearts from the inevitable difficulty of loss, in that process, we forget circle time. But there is a way to remember circle time. And that's what the assembly is about. That's what the practice is about. Right? It is to allow circle time. And so the great matter of the birth and death is not just that being born is and then dying is a great matter, although it is, and both of those are. But that birth, death is a great matter. That the full circle in which we call it birth from one side and we call it death from another side, but we only do that in a very provisional way. We don't understand what that gateway is. Where does the baby come from? Where do they go? We can't grasp it. And that's the circle time. And that's why paying attention to time is important. Not because it's going to accrue something or we're going to lose something, but because that circle is like something that the whole world's going in and out of constantly. So whack, that's what the Han tells us. Reminds us. Practice this, live this. Now actually this is what we're practicing when we sit Zazen, and hopefully when we don't sit Zazen. But if we just take the side from sitting Zazen as a way to examine it, when we sit quietly for a while, it's this circle time that is what we're enacting. That's why it's important to throw away your sense of how much time has passed or hasn't passed. It's also one of the most direct things that will mess with you when you first start meditating. It's like, really, is the bell not gonna ring? I'm sure you have that experience sometime, right? It's like, you gotta be kidding me. Did you go to sleep over there? You know, do you feel that way sometimes? Yeah. One time it was great, very early on. This was probably 19 years ago or 18 years ago. And this hall was much smaller and the bell was hanging there to the right side of that door. It was this bell we would use for meditation too. And the attendant that day, it was an evening assembly, he fell asleep. He wasn't snoring or anything and we couldn't tell. And we were sitting a long time. But I was pretty young and I was like, there is no time. Circle time, I'm not budging, circle time. And finally it was just getting a little ridiculous. It was like, this is, you know, and I think, I don't remember who it was that finally was like, Nick. Nick, And then Nick, ooh. And then we all tried to unfold our legs. I like to think that now 20 years later we would be a little more, we'd be like, yeah, Nick probably fell asleep. We should wake him up. We're a little clinging too much to the non-conventional experience of time. And probably hurt our legs a little bit. But anyway, the reason I'm saying about this is really this should be our attitude when we sit down, and to make up the circumstance in which you can, as much as possible, let go of time. Now, in the hall, we have, that's the reason that the position of the jikido, or the timekeeper and kind of attendant of the hall, is so important. They take on that burden for all of us, right? So that they have to pay very careful, and it's a big practice of the attendant of the hall to be able to learn to pay attention to time without grabbing onto it too hard. Right? It's a hard practice, but it's a good one. But everyone else then gets freed from that kind of calculation, that kind of clinging to the time. And then you have this opportunity to say, oh, circle time. Of course, there's time that's moving through. I'm getting older, things are changing, seasons are changing, but that's birth, death, right? It's not birth, death that's separate. Birth and death, that's all the circle. That's all circle. That's all circle time. So that's an opportunity to say, oh, I don't really want to live through that. It's like, oh, I have to get to work. It's this time, and I'm late today, and we're going to go and meet my kid. And like our minds are just doing that all the time, right? So this circle that we get exposed to is a circle that says, oh, no, actually, the 20 years is right here. Right? My job is not to try to figure that out. My job is to show up with a certain attitude, really. And so the meditation becomes about a shifting of our regard or a shifting of our attitude, as opposed to creating this particular kind of calm space or clear mind or something like that. The attitude is what we're really cultivating. How do we come to the moment? Right? Not what is the experience of the moment. That's important, and it teaches you about your attitude. But the more fundamental thing is your attitude. In my teacher's temple, this is so great. There was 3 grandfather clocks that people had donated to the temple at some point. And one of them was like a hanging on the wall type, kind of a smaller one, and it hung in the main hall like this. I didn't like that clock. It was always ticking and stuff. And then there's another one in the entrance, which would be like about the same distance here, like if we had one in the front room. And then there was another one upstairs. So it would be like if in the upstairs where the residents live, if there was another one. Well, they were all, not battery operated. They were like, wind and pull the chains and everything. And so my teacher would go around and do that. But inevitably, everything was a little bit off. And then he had a watch that he would time meditation with. So when I was first sitting in, you would sit down, and then they were completely different. But not so completely different that they wouldn't mess with you and you would think you might remember how one related to the other one. So the time, because they would chime, right? When it would hit, we'd start sitting on the hour and you'd hear a chime, and then, a half hour would be up and there'd be another chime, and then there'd be this other chime. We'd sit 45 minutes usually. There's supposed to be this other chime that would happen at 45 minutes. And I'd just be like, oh God, he must have forgot it. He must have forgot it. He must have forgot it. And then the clock would chime. I think, oh, we're almost there. We're almost there. But it would be totally wrong. And then the other one would chime. And the other one would chime. And then his watch would be something different. Or he fell asleep. And so we'd be sitting there for a long time. And it was really, for me, I'm really thankful for having that kind of chaotic environment, because it really forced me to regard time in a different way. Yeah. So I'm just kind of making fun of all of this. But this is really a way in through meditation, if you want to encounter what I'm talking about here as circle time, or encounter through circle time, the living. That's also what anniversaries point us to. If you think about the relationships that you have that are the most important to you as they coming full circle, either through an anniversary, through a culmination of this kind or that kind, your heart knows how to do this. It really does. And it's not separate from mourning. It's not separate from grief. It's not separate from celebration. It's not separate from a kind of like sense of accomplishment. All of those things are part of it. But what we usually do is we grab a piece of those and we make it about that, and we forget to do this other thing, which is to see like, oh, this is life and this is death. And that's actually how important it is, not that we've accomplished something. So we have time for a few questions, if anything, or comments.
Just So I always say that the unconscious, or we might say the Alaya, takes a much longer time, speaking of time, to learn something. So we can dream of someone that has died a long time, or in my experience, and they're never dead in a dream. And I always think that's because, however to explain that, or not explain it actually, that's a true, there's some kind of truth in that, that we can't access consciously.
I think one of the things that points at is, where does anyone actually live?
Exactly.
So I would be, in a conventional sense, quite convinced that you live over there and I live over here. But on a fairly small reflection, even a fairly like unprofound reflection, I could see that you're obviously not over there and I'm over here. If I just talk about it from the sense of me experiencing and you experiencing, there's no way for me to know a June as an external being. You live, my consciousness is riddled with you, right? And the dissolution of your physical being is a part of a process of living and dying, but is one layer. And that's a thing which which even if we tend to be more kind of scientific materialist minded, which I don't happen to be, but even if we are more that way, then all of these other layers of what it means for a person to be there are affected, but they're not. They have their own process, I guess I would say. So I really usually, when I'm talking with people about loss and about how to be present in that, and we've talked a lot about this, is keep talking. Don't close the door. Right. The door closing is your idea about the person just being a material, just a flesh sack, and that's the limits of what a being is. And so, because the pain of losing a person physically is so huge, it's just our natural reaction to want to shut the door and not face that. But if you can keep the door open and you keep offering attention, care, receiving attention and care, you'll see that, circle time. The gate's a circle, and that this person doesn't essentially come or go, and I don't essentially come or go. In the Buddhist lingo, we would call that the unborn, and the Alaya consciousness is the unborn. Is the unborn? Yeah, it doesn't come or go. It doesn't have any. And that's why it can be, this is a little technical if you don't understand what I'm saying, don't worry about it. That is the reason that it can be the receptacle for the seeds of karma.
Exactly.
Yeah. If it were to come and go, it could not be the receptacle. But the Alaya, in its truest sense, is simply the mirror of consciousness. And it doesn't come or go. And that's why karma can unfold. And from that understanding, that's why hardship is our teacher, because the karma which is reflected in our living, which all comes from that mind ground, is a teaching. In a way, is a kind of personification of a bodhisattva that is meeting us. It's not always the bodhisattva we want to meet, but it meets us in that way. And that attitude, if we come back to that attitude, this is also, those of you who've been studying the Universal Gateway chapter of the Lotus Sutra over the past few months in our practice, that's one of the reasons this is such a powerful teaching. The Universal Gateway that you were teaching on just a couple weeks ago, is that in the middle of those most difficult times, people, we read the Universal Gateway, and one way to understand it is Avalokitesvara will save you. And that's true. But the way Avalokitesvara saves you is not exactly what you might imagine. They pull you through the hardship rather than pulling you away from it.
Right.
And the throughness of the hardship is where we emerge through that teaching, and are a different person on the other side of it, or we would say we're a transformed person in some way.
Thank you.
Hi.
I encounter this every year with my students.
Mm-hmm.
So I teach 8th graders and 7th graders, and the 8th graders are reaching an end of often a 9-year stretch in this small community that has a lot of connection and support, and same teacher for 3 years in a row and another 3 years. And then they've been with the same kids since kindergarten. And these really close, and then now they're splitting to go to different high schools, and they're not wanting to think about it or feel it, but they start getting kind of snarky right around
8th graders?
Snarky? like even above and beyond. And I figured, out they're feeling grief. But they're not aware they're feeling this grief. So they're pushing away. They're doing this kind of pushing away. And so like this, it's always around that time of year where I start thinking, we gotta have that conversation about just to bring it up into their consciousness. Maybe an activity, a gratitude activity, that kind of thing. So it's a good reminder. I always wonder how to do it, because I think about it in terms of, Buddhism, but like I have to handle it with them in a very secular kind of way.
So I can tell you the way you did it for our daughter, who was 8th grader, and you held an assembly. I don't know if you still do this, in which each of the 8th graders came forward, and you spoke very clearly about the beauty of them as a person. And so I know that our daughter Satsuki experienced that and she was not such a snarky type, but the way she experienced it was she knew who she was. And she didn't know who she was in the abstract, or like an idea of who I am, because I'm holding on to this idea of who I am. Although we all have that. That's not a problem really, but relying on that's not very reliable. She knew who she was as a member of a community. And one of the profound reasons she knew that was because her teachers saw her and they articulated what they saw, particularly the parts that made her the splendid person that she was. And so when we take the time to do that, it's not the snarkiness isn't gonna just go away exactly, but then that person knows something that they didn't know. And we're pretty bereft of that kind of activity now in our lives, where individuals are honored as members of a community, and not in an abstract way, but as in their particular belonging there, so that they can go on to the next thing.
We carry it with them.
Exactly. And so that's why not only for school teachers, although I think this is there should be many classes about this when you're going to teaching school every time. Any quarter you're in teaching school, there should be one whole class that's just about how do you see the honest goodness and truth in other people. Like if a school teacher can't do that, you could teach a lot of things, but you're not gonna cultivate the heart of that student. And so for school teachers definitely, but for all of us, how do we see that? How do we see that in other people? That really is a deep calling. Not to get lost just in the kind of details of a person's complexity and the parts of them that might rub you the wrong way, or the parts that you really are attracted to. All of that is inevitable, that we'll have all of that. So we need to cultivate the eyes that can see more deeply into what is the heart of this person, and to try to meet that heart of the person. And my experience is that in that community, which my kids all grew up in, where you teach, Ridgeline, that's the why I trusted that community. So, you know what when I taught seniors, it's a little different when 8th graders, and it wasn't so, I don't know how much grief was going on for the seniors. But I used to, right after spring break, I would always give this lecture. I'd be like, look, we're on a slide, and the slide's going down to like June. I'd name the day, June 12th or 13th, whatever it was the graduation. I was like, we're gonna have a good time, we're gonna have a bad time. I'm not gonna mess with you too much, but don't mess with me too much. We could really enjoy each other these next 6 weeks, or 8 weeks, or whatever it was, or we could really not. And I felt like that was also you know, I'm saying it as a joke here, but it was also a call to attention. It was like, look, this is all we have, and so let's care for it.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about fidelity in relation to the Bodhisattva vow?
Mm-hmm.
In particular, I feel my life kind of oscillates between getting attached to it as something tangible, in which I make the mistake of trying to form myself into the superhero and then falling short, being guilt-ridden because of it.
Yeah.
And then recognizing its emptiness and forgetting about it.
Yeah. I think one of the main reasons for that pattern, which is, I want to encourage everyone, please do that. That's a good thing. What you're talking about is a good thing to do. It's like really believe in something and throw yourself into it and fall short and be like, oh, I'm falling short, and then struggle with. Then you're like, well, maybe nothing can be done about it, and you kind of forget about it, and then you wake up to it. That process is really fundamental to the vow. But what we need to do while we're experiencing that is starting to see this underlying dynamic, which is we kind of think that the vow is something that I make up, or that is like mine to decide. And the vow is something much more fundamental than that. If we go back to Buddhist teachings about rebirth, for example, the fundamental teachings about rebirth in Mahayana Buddhism would say that you received and took this bodhisattva vow. You have no idea. You don't know who you were, what you were engaged in, but at the rising of the bodhicitta, or the mind of awakening, which is both the seed of awakening and the totality of awakening, it is circle time as awakening, that at that point, everything was riddled with that bodhisattva spirit throughout space and time. And so what you throw out ahead of yourself as being what you want to accomplish with your resources and energy of this life, it's not that it has nothing to do with you, it has everything to do with you, but it's a you that is unfathomably beyond your grasp. And so what we want to do in that is not just, am I keeping what I said I would do or not do, but we want to continue coming back to this unknowable vow. Sometimes I would call it the unknowable body of vow. Like there's this body, like it really is a body, but it just goes way out beyond what we can touch. We can't touch enough of it to know what its entirety is, but it pushes on and through us all the time. And so we're in this struggle going back and forth between trying to do the best we can and falling short, and then falling about it, forgetting about it, waking back up to it. In any of those cases, try to feel down for what are you feeling of the body, and not telling yourself a story that you know what the body is. Telling yourself a story that is, I know I don't know what the body is, but it is impacting me, it's moving in me and through me, and I want to pay attention to that as I'm going towards the goal that I have set. That's also a reason why the goals should be bold. You know, they should be like, let's reform housing in Oregon, right? Let's do that. Let's completely turn it on its head. Because if they're not big like that, they don't really respond to that unknowable body. Now, I don't mean big in the terms of like what I was just saying. I don't mean that's big because it's all of Oregon or it's how many houses or whatever like that, but because it's kind of an impossible thing. You know, beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Like that's the terrain that we're in with the vow. You know, you could make a vow like this: I want to raise happy children. That's a huge vow, yeah. And impossible. Oh, one last thing I'll say before we go is if you have if everyone here has a mother, whether you know them or not. So I would encourage you today, if they're personified in a way that you can contact them, whether that is materially or in other planes, please do that and have a chat with them. Maybe serve them some tea or scotch or whatever it is that they like. And if you're not in that kind of relationship with them, find some way to honor what they are for your life, understanding that oftentimes those relationships are complicated. I'm very purposely not saying that you have to do this particular thing, other than honor that place that they are for your